The kits for Summer Robin and Aventurine are finally here, and these two characters are by far my most hyped characters of the version 4 patches so far. So let's dive into what their abilities do, what teams I'm expecting them to be played in, and just overall my first impressions and thoughts on Robin Summeretto and Aventurine Waveflair. Since Robin was drip marketed first and will probably be the first banner, let's start with her kit. Robin is a Wind Remembrance character who focuses on a mix of supportive buffs and personal sub DPS damage, sort of similar to Cyrene or Tribby in terms of the role they fulfill on a team. Robin's basic attack is nothing special, but do note that she is HP scaling like most Remembrance characters. Before we discuss the rest of Robin's kit, let's jump down to her talent first. Robin's talent is where we can find her Mema Sprite, the Summer Songbirds, who have a very high base speed equal to 180% of Robin's speed. This Mema Sprite is interesting because even though they all count as only one single Mema Sprite, there are technically 3 of them that she has to summon. She starts with only Bessie, the first Songbird, and she gains stacks of Vibe whenever an ally attacks or heals or shields. When her Vibe stacks reach 6 while Bessie is on the field, she summons the second Songbird, Drummy, my goat. And when the Vibe stacks reach 12 or more, she summons Paddle. Once all 3 Songbirds have been summoned, so basically once she reaches 12 Vibe stacks, she immediately enters the Fever state and deploys a zone. The zone allows all allies to ignore defense equal to 15% plus a certain amount of Robin's Vibe stacks. Robin can hold up to 50 Vibe stacks max, so at max stacks, she's giving 40% defense shred in the zone. This enhanced state of Robin's is going to be very similar to original Robin, where Robin is essentially removed from the action bar and cannot take turns while she's in the Fever state and offering this defense shred buff. Now that we've covered the bread and butter of her kit, let's go over how the rest of her kit plays around this playstyle of building up Vibe stacks to enter her Fever state and offer her buffs. Robin's skill is essentially 1-to-1 the same as Remembrance Trailblazer's skill, summoning her first bird Bessie if it isn't on the field, or healing it if it is already on the field, and giving herself 6 Vibe stacks, which, remember, getting 6 Vibe stacks summons the second bird Drummy, and getting 12 Vibe stacks is the requirement to enter her enhanced state, so her skill is really nice for this. We might as well briefly jump down to her technique to point out that Robin's technique also lets her start the fight with 6 Vibe stacks, so her technique plus her skill will instantly put her at 12 Vibe stacks, essentially giving her her enhanced state and thus her defense shred buffs right at the start of a fight. Robin's ultimate requires 140 energy and is a mix of Sunday's entire kit, action advancing one character by 100% and regenerating 20% of their maximum energy. The selected character then becomes the special guest. Being the special guest essentially just allows every attack from the special guest to give Robin an extra stack of Vibe. It's unclear if a Mema Sprite like Evie could still give the extra Vibe stacks if Evernight is selected as the special guest, so we'll have to see how it interacts with Mema Sprites and their Mema Masters. The special guest state only lasts for 2 turns. So essentially, Robin's kit centers around her Vibe stacks. She gains Vibe stacks from her technique, her skill, and whenever ally characters attack or heal and shield, with an additional Vibe stack when the character is selected from her ultimate attacks. When she reaches 12 Vibe stacks, she enters her enhanced state and buffs the entire team, and further Vibe stacks increase her buffs and do other things with the rest of her kit, which we'll get into now. First, her Mema Sprite, the Summer Songbirds, deal AoE wind damage every time they take action. Additionally, while Robin is in her enhanced state or fever state, she increases her own damage by 60%, increasing based on her Vibe stacks, all the way up to 160% damage bonus for herself at max 50 Vibe stacks. Robin's Mema Sprite talent gives her countdown a speed of 140, which is quite a bit faster than original Robin's countdown speed of 90. Every time the countdown takes a turn, Robin does not exit her enhanced state, but she instead loses half of her Vibe stacks, with a minimum of 12 Vibe stacks lost every time. She only exits her countdown once all of her Vibe stacks are depleted, so theoretically, if you can build up Vibe stacks faster than she consumes them, you could stay in her enhanced state forever, although we'll see how feasible this actually is without eidolons. Regardless, while the Summer Songbirds are on the field, they essentially inflict a vulnerability debuff of 10 to 20% depending on how many of them are on the field, which for the most part is going to be all 3, so that's 20% vulnerability literally just for existing. As for her other Mema Sprite talents, she gains 20 energy when the Summer Songbirds Mema Sprite is summoned, although I doubt she gets this for the subsequent 2 being summoned after the first one. That would be a lot of front-loaded energy, and she already has energy regeneration elsewhere in her kit. Additionally, Robin advances her action by 50% when her Mema Sprite disappears, aka when her enhanced state ends, allowing her to quickly take a turn and use her skill for more Vibe stacks. For Robin's personal bonus abilities, her first one increases the buffs she gives to the team. When an ally gives Robin Vibe stacks, which is essentially any time they attack or heal or shield, if the ally's attack stat is higher than Robin's attack stat, so basically any attack scaling character, they gain attack based on a percentage of Robin's Vibe stacks and her own max HP. In general, this should hover around anywhere between 2 to 2.5k attack, which is a massive attack steroid, even higher than original Robin. If an ally's attack is lower than Robin's, so if they aren't an attack scaler like Evernight, then they instead get a crit damage buff based on Robin's Vibe stacks, hovering around 60 to 90% crit damage, which is quite a bit more underwhelming than her attack buff, but still nice for the non-attack scalers to make use of her. Keep in mind mind, she gives all these buffs even when she isn't in her enhanced state. Her enhanced state is mainly just for the defense thread. Her second bonus ability gives her stacks of groove when she receives healing or shielding. And when allies attack and give Robin stacks of vibe, she consumes 1 stack of groove to regenerate 3 fixed energy. So basically, Robin converts healing or shielding into energy every time her allies attack, incentivizing her to be played with a sustain for her energy rotation, since she obviously isn't getting energy any other way while she's in her enhanced state and isn't able to take action. And lastly, Robin buffs her and her Memesprite's crit rate by 50%, so they can contribute a decent amount of sub DPS damage. Overall, Robin really comes across as the upscale to Remembrance Trailblazer that everyone thought Cyrene would be. She brings in action advance and energy on her ultimate, massive buffs for the whole team, whether it be attack or crit damage, as well as defense thread, and personal damage. You do have to build up a lot of vibe stacks for her, and that may be a challenge on some teams, but on paper, the buffs Robin provides adds up to a total of 20 to 40% defense ignore in her enhanced state, depending on the vibe stacks, upwards of 2000 attack for attack scalers, otherwise upwards of 90% crit damage for non-attack scalers, 20% vulnerability, and action advance, though it won't happen super frequently, as well as 20% energy for one character, and personal damage. This is a lot of things crammed into one character's kit, but it reminds me of Mortonak's Blade, who also had a super overloaded kit. Robin has some extra utility like action advancing and energy regeneration, in comparison to Mortonak's Blade's ability to enable sustainless setups to be easier with his tankiness and taunt value. So all in all, both of these characters are looking like very powerful general supports. Just the fact that Robin is being compared to Mortonak's Blade at all should be enough to tell you how powerful she's looking to be. My one concern for her would be her vibe stack generation. She might struggle to stack it outside of certain team comps, like Remembrance team comps or follow-up attack team comps that attack a lot. And unlike Blade, who only requires ally attacks to stack his own personal damage, Robin relies on ally attacks to actually ramp up her damage buffs, since her buffs depend on having higher vibe stacks. So her flexibility may come at the cost of lesser damage amp outside of specific teams. Her eidolons do somewhat help with this though. To keep it very simple, Robin's E1 increases her max vibe stacks and gives her extra vibe stacks from all sources. Her E2 is literally just a Cypher ultimate every time her Memesprite attacks, storing up damage from allies and unleashing it in bursts of true damage to the enemy with the highest HP. Her E4 gives even more extra vibe stacks and buffs the speed of her own Memesprite, and her E6 increases the team's all-type res spend by 20% and then focuses on buffing her own personal damage, doubling her Memesprite's damage multiplier and increasing her own crit damage by 200% during her enhanced state. Robin's light cone is also pretty funny, increasing her own max HP and giving her a free Von Rack effect, action advancing her by 40% at the start of battle. It also gives the team 1 skill point when she uses her ultimate. Then, she starts the battle with a buff that gives 20% speed to the entire team. However, while this buff ticks down on Robin's own turn, the buff only lasts on her for 2 turns, and Robin has no way to refresh this buff. So, as soon as Robin has taken 2 turns, this team-wide speed buff disappears, and the light cone literally has no way to get it back, which is super weird. Obviously, Robin takes herself off the action bar while she's in her enhanced state, and her eidolons do give her a lot of vibe stacks to keep her in the enhanced state, so it is possible to limit the amount of turns Robin takes, but the second she takes her second turn, her light cone speed buff is just gone forever. It's just really weird in terms of game design, because Hoyo usually designs light cone buffs that can be refreshed in some way. It's a really weird light cone that honestly doesn't even bring any damage buffs to the team, unless you're playing characters that scale off of speed for their damage, like Aglaya, or Hyacinth, or Cyrene, I guess. So it's just a very strange light cone, and at first glance, doesn't seem all that crazy. I would expect it to get some changes. Overall, Robin is looking very powerful as a modern day support, and while it does feel like she's been made specifically to synergize with characters like Aglaya via providing a massive attack buff, action advance, energy, and naturally benefiting from Aglaya doing a lot of attacks to stack Robin's vibe stacks, as well as synergizing with the other mono rem team, and just generally being very good at stacking Cyrene's stacks due to having a fast acting Memesprite, she also brings enough buffing to be a strong consideration in other teams as well. As for the question of how she fits into mono rem teams, presumably Robin is best used as a way to allow you to split your Remembrance DPSs of Casterus and Evernight, using Casterus on one side and Evernight on the other, thanks to generalist supports like Trippy and now Mortonak's Blade, and also Robin, synergizing so well with the Remembrance teams and giving them more options for supports. She's a very strong and cool character, and I'm excited to see what people are able to do with her massive buffing potential. And then we have Aventurine Waveflair, my personal darling, the one I have been saving the entirety of Planarcadia for. So let's dive into my summary and first impressions of Aventurine's kit. Aventurine is Quantum Elation, breaking the Remembrance Path's curse of new paths, not having any limited male characters. His basic attack is nothing special. His skill is also pretty simple, dealing AoE quantum damage and giving himself stacks of punchline, which is fairly standard for an Elation character, but he also gives himself stacks of a resource called Fervor, which we'll cover in a second. Aventurine's ultimate is also a simple attack of AoE quantum damage at the cost of 140 energy, giving him even more punchline and even more Fervor stacks compared to his skill. It really does feel feel like his ultimate is just his skill, but slightly bigger. And truth be told, the damage of his skill and ultimate is not where the majority of his damage is anyway. So the skill and ultimate really mainly just serve as stack generators for his punchline and fervor stacks. His ultimate does also buff his own speed by 25% though, and it's generally not too difficult to have full uptime on his speed buff, as long as you can rotate through his ultimate in 3 turns. So, about those fervor stacks. First off, before Aventurine's kit came out, there was a lot of fright going on in the community about whether Aventurine would be an elation DPS forced into Yaoguang teams, or if he would be the rumored Ashblade follow-up attack main DPS who slots in with them. Well, I'm happy to tell you that the answer is both. Aventurine can do both. In fact, multiple things in his kit encourage you to be able to pick and choose which one you'd prefer. So let's go through Aventurine's talent. First off, he extends certified banger stacks on him by 1 turn, which is very good since, as we'll see later, Aventurine wants to move very fast and take a lot of turns. So keeping certified banger 1 extra turn is very helpful for his damage. Then, every time an ally attacks, Aventurine gains 1 stack of punchline and 1 stack of fervor. So it goes without saying that he inherently synergizes with teammates that attack frequently, aka modern follow-up attack characters like Glade and Ashvale and Tribi. So what do fervor stacks do? First off, he can hold a max of 30 stacks. When Aventurine reaches 10 fervor stacks, he launches his elation skill 1 time, with a fixed 20 punchline taken into account. After using his elation skill in this way, Aventurine enhances his next elation skill from the Aha instant to his enhanced elation skill, which we'll get to in a second. Additionally, when Aventurine has certified banger, which should be always, his skill and ultimate additionally deal AoE quantum elation damage. Let's talk about those elation skills now. Aventurine's regular elation skill, which is what he's attacking with in his talent when his fervor stacks reach 10, is a large hit of elation damage to all enemies, followed by 10 bounce attacks of elation damage. In terms of scaling, it's about double the scaling of Evanesia's elation skill, which obviously isn't where most of Evanesia's damage is coming from to begin with, but that's just for a frame of reference. Then, Aventurine's enhanced elation skill, which he gets access to after using his regular elation skill from his talent, increases the number of bounces by consuming his stacks of fervor. At max fervor stacks, this elation skill is doing even more damage than Silverwolf 999 or Sparks' elation skills, which is a huge amount of damage. We'll have to see if he can actually max out his fervor stacks for this, but if he can, this number is pretty big. These elation skills are going to be the majority of Aventurine's damage, and since elation damage doesn't scale off of anything other than his elation stats and crit stats, this means he is going to be very similar to Evanesia in the sense that it doesn't really matter what main stat you give him on his orb, as long as he has a good crit ratio. And an energy rope is definitely going to be preferred to help with his ultimate's energy generation to keep his speed buff, since he doesn't rely on any of the other rope main stats. Aventurine's technique lets him start the battle with 2 stacks of fervor and a 20 certified banger, which is nice. It should be noted that it's an attacking technique to enter battle, so you can't use both this one and Mortonak's blades, but it should be fine. Aventurine's technique should usually be the priority. So far, Aventurine's kit has been incredibly simple, mostly just doing damage and giving himself stacks of punchline and fervor. His bonus abilities are where things get a bit more interesting. First of all, he is very similar to Silverwolf in that his first bonus ability converts his speed stat into elation. More specifically, if he has more than 160 speed, he gains 30% elation, and every point of speed above 160 converts to an additional 1% of elation. You definitely want to stack as much speed on him as possible while still balancing his crit stats, especially if Aventurine is going to be solo elation, and thus has very little access to any elation buffs if he's not being ran with Yaoguang. And speaking of solo elation, Aventurine's second bonus ability addresses his team building contrast. His kit just straight up does different things depending on whether he's solo elation or not. If Aventurine is being played with other elation characters like Yaoguang, then he simply buffs his own elation stat by 100%. Bam! Lots more damage. That's nice. However, if Aventurine is the only elation character on the team, so he's being played with Blade and Ashvale or Tribi, or even the new Robin or somebody else, then instead of buffing his damage, he instead gains bonuses from ally attacks, thus pushing more synergy from follow-up attack units. First, he gains 2 points of certified banger and 1 punchline when allies attack, which helps buff his own damage, even though he's certainly not going to be stacking Evanesia levels of certified banger. And secondly, and most importantly, he increases Aha speed by 25 every time an ally attacks. This lets him ramp up Aha speed by a lot, which is sort of necessary considering he would be the only elation character on the team, and a lot of his damage depends on his enhanced elation skill from Aha. For his last bonus ability, he gets 48% crit damage just for existing, and he gains an additional 48% crit damage after teammates use a basic attack, skill, follow-up attack, or ultimate. So basically, any type of attack from allies lets him max out his 96% crit damage buff. He also gains 1 extra point of fervor when allies launch any attack. So if you combine that with his talent, which already gives him 1 stack of fervor when allies attack, he's essentially getting 2 stacks of fervor for every ally attack. It's a pretty simple kit, all things considered, mostly just building as much speed as possible to take as many turns as possible to stack his fervor stacks, also relying on his teammates to attack frequently to stack fervor and speed up Aha in order to launch his elation skills for the majority of his damage. A simple playstyle, but the inherent synergy with follow-up attack teammates who attack a lot, as well as his own ability to take turns super fast, is is really nice. His eidolons obviously help with this even more. His E1 especially sounds really strong on paper, giving 24% res pen and then allowing him to launch his unenhanced elation skill every time he reaches an increment of 10 fervor stacks, which isn't too hard considering allies can stack it fast by attacking. Not to mention Aventurine gives himself a decent amount of fervor from his skill and ultimate. This just lets him launch way more elation skills per rotation, improving his damage and energy rotation. His E2 is hard to quantify, which sort of makes the rest of his eidolons hard to quantify as well. It increases his maximum fervor stacks from 30 to 50 and gives him additional stacks of fervor on his own skill, ultimate, and elation skill usages. It doesn't allow his teammates to give him any extra fervor stacks, so I'm not sure how reliably you'll even be maxing this out and making full use of his E2. His E4 is 18% def shred, which actually starts approaching the point of overcapping on defense shred when paired with Ashvel and Blade, especially since some of his better relic sets include the Magical Girl Elation set or the Quantum set, both of which provide 20% defense shred. Lastly, Aventurine's E6 is also super weird to me. The 25% Merry Make, which is essentially just 25% true damage for elation damage, is pretty standard for an elation E6, but then he has an additional effect on his E6 that converts every usage of his unenhanced elation skill into his big enhanced elation skill. But this effect only happens after he uses his ultimate 2 times, which means you're inherently going to require 4 to 5 turns to even start making full use of Aventurine's E6. Sure, it's fine in a longer fight, but pulling an E6 specifically for longer fights feels really weird. I just really don't know what to make of this. It also causes his fervor stacks to no longer reset from his enhanced elation skill, which is nice and synergizes nicely with his E2, increasing his max fervor stacks, but on its own, the E6 feels strangely backloaded in terms of how it takes so long to ramp up its usage, and I would expect to see some changes to it. Because, remember, this is only the V1 of their beta, and things are sure to change. But before we wrap up, let's briefly cover Aventurine's Light Cone. Much like the rest of his kit, Aventurine's Light Cone is very simple, offering a plethora of offensive stats for him. 18% crit rate, 20% speed, and 36% elation, with conditions that are very easy to meet, like simply launching his elation skills. And once he has these buffs, they are permanent for the whole fight, unlike Robin's Light Cone, which has a turn limit before it goes away and never comes back. Oh, and Aventurine's Light Cone also recovers a skill point for every 3 usages of his elation skill, just because why not? It's just offering him a ton of stats. Overall, Aventurine has 2 main playstyles. He can pair up with an elation team and just focus on hyper buffing his damage, or he can pair up with a follow-up attack team and focus on speeding up Aha and stacking his fervor stacks. Yaoguang should be his most important teammate for an elation team, while Mortonak's Blade is most important for his follow-up attack team. And from there, you can mix and match different supports into the last slot. I can even see a world where you pair Yaoguang and Blade together, combining the elation and follow-up attack playstyle for Aventurine, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I will definitely be doing a ton of experimenting and testing for these characters, so definitely subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on my videos covering Robin and Aventurine. My next video will certainly be a much deeper dive into their power levels and teams and playstyles after I've gotten personal experience with them. And be sure to like this video if you found it helpful or enjoyable at all. Which of the 2 are you most excited for? And where do you plan to play them if you are going to be pulling? Let me know what you think of them in the comments below. For me personally, I'm investing everything into Aventurine, and I'll pull whichever teammates end up being best for him after some testing. But that'll be all for now. So thank you so much for watching this video, and with all of that said, until next time!